What is unacceptable today that was normal 20 years ago? I've seen a lot of the playground equipment I played on as a kid get torn down and replaced. Merry-go-round, gone. Giant metal ass roasting slide. No moss. The majority of the playground stuff was taken out and replaced with one centralized, jungle gym. To be fair, the one piece that got taken out needed to be. Kids kept peeing in it and it stank. I think the only thing left untouched were the swings. Even the spring animals are gone. We used to have so much fun on those because we could rock them so hard, the faces' tails would touch the ground. Relatively small age gaps in relationships are being increasingly scrutinized. Mandatory disclaimer that there is such a thing as too big of an age gap, especially if one party is very young, and 30-year-olds are even worse. Hitting on 16-year-old high schoolers was always horrible. Not what I'm discussing here. But nowadays, it seems increasingly popular to pick apart small differences like a freshman and senior in college dating. People say stuff like, "Gross, she's barely legal and he can legally drink, they can't possibly have anything in common, what a creep." That was definitely not the narrative 20 years ago. A 21-year-old and 18-year-old dating was not considered a large or abnormal age gap when I was growing up. Joking. I mean, I'm being hyperbolic, but it feels that way. It feels like stupid, crass humor suddenly became illegal one day. You look back at movies, TV, and stand-up from that time and most of the time you're thinking, boy, you couldn't get away with that nowadays. What's worse is that nowadays we shun, and some go as far as to ruin the lives of people who dare to say that they think that stuff is funny. At some point, people stopped understanding that comedy is comedy and that jokes are jokes. Doing business without some sort of electronic presence, website app, online marketing, payment processing including online abilities, and credit cards, etc. If you run a business only offline, accepting only cash, you are shooting yourself in both feet, and you'll likely be out of business soon. No one is calling you, no one is paying you in cash or with checks. It's not the 80s anymore. There are only a very few of these businesses still around. And many people will just not patronize them because they don't carry cash or can't even find out about them without an online presence in some form. Hell, even cash-only stores and restaurants I've seen still have some online presence on Yelp, Google, and have an online menu or something, at the very least. Kids being outside playing for hours without an adult. When I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, we'd be in the backyard or even out in the woods from when school let out until dinner. We also walked home from school by ourselves, with a buddy, but no adults. I'm sure this probably depended on where you lived, but pretty much everyone I knew did this. Basically, no parent picked up their kid. We walked home, played outside, wandered, got into mostly innocent trouble. Helicopter parents were unknown to us. Now, I can't imagine kids of 8 or 10 years old being outside unsupervised. Or even inside sometimes. Okay. That's a little more than 20 years, but I think a lot of kids still did things like this 20 years ago too. Honestly, I've reflected a lot on how much more acceptable it was to be racist, sexist, and homophobic even just 20 years ago in the 2000s. I recall how much more power and influence evangelicals had back then, too, and how that would also feed into xenophobia and nationalism in the USA. The thing is, back then in the 2000s, many of us thought we were way more progressive and open-minded when compared to 20 years before in the 1980s, and the 80s seemed more open and accepting than the 1950s. I'm not saying we're perfect now, and I'm sure in 20 years we'll remark on the bigotry of today, but it's certainly come a long way from the man-show days of the Bush era. Remember that, anyone. In many ways, the MAGA movement shows just how far we've come. Trumpies are working hard to turn the clock back so they can go back to being casually racist, sexist, homophobic, etc., and see their bigotry reinforced in the media. I think that progress comes from openly discussing problems, which can also be exhausting for everyone involved. Telling someone when they messed up so they can avoid similar issues in the future. This happened somewhat recently at work. We're talking a bit over a week ago though, where one of my coworkers wrecked their car when they ran a red light at a busy intersection. When I said, "Wow, that was stupid and reckless. You should be grateful you're not dead," everyone, and I mean every single person, was against me, accusing me of victim blaming and saying I can't excuse what I said by pointing out that they could have died because that was making it even more harsh on them. My opinion varies depending on cultural, social, and technological shifts. Some examples include smoking indoors. Smoking in public places like restaurants, bars, and offices was much more common and accepted 2 decades ago. Today, it's generally prohibited indoors in many places due to health concerns and anti-smoking campaigns. Casual use of offensive language. Certain words and phrases that were once casually used in everyday conversation are now recognized as offensive and inappropriate, leading to more awareness and sensitivity about language choices. Lack of diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion practices in workplaces and communities have significantly evolved over the past 20 years. What may have been a lack of representation or awareness about diversity issues is now often seen as unacceptable, with more emphasis on inclusivity and equity. Privacy concern. With the rise of social media and digital technology, privacy concerns have become more prominent. Sharing personal information and photos online without much thought was more common in the past, while today, there's a greater awareness of privacy risks and the need for digital safety. Environmental awareness. Environmental consciousness and sustainability practices have gained much more attention in recent years compared to 2 decades ago. Actions and practices that were once considered normal but harmful to the environment, such as excessive plastic use or disregard for recycling, are now viewed as unacceptable in many circles. 20 years ago, people had no idea about the preferred pronouns thing. I kinda twigged to trans people in the late 1980s because I started meeting them at parties in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. So, it's been easier for me to immediately ask Zoomers what their preferred pronouns are. My fellow boomer friends are struggling, and it's not malice or rudeness, it's just that this is a very new thing, and they've had decades of not encountering this very new thing. I was going to say smoking indoors, but 20 years ago was 2004 where I live. Oh wait, I just googled it, and it said 2003, so I wasn't actually far off. Needing to take your hat off at the dinner table for politeness. Sadly, using the R word casually and making gay jokes. Water fountains being the main way of hydration in schools. Wearing sandals without socks. Handing in your resume as opposed to applying online. Playing outside without parental supervision. Not having a cell phone. Just popping by someone's house because you were in the area. Declawing your cat, thank goodness. Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on the best Reddit stories.